had the opportunity yesterday to be in a classroom, not my classroom, Robert McGill's classroom at the University of Toronto. And it was an opportunity to spend time with a bunch of strangers who looked as raw and grief-stricken and gathering themselves as I was feeling. So it's nice to carry that momentum forward. We've got a lot of work to do. This is from the first chapter, which sets out my methodology, and I wanted to read from this chapter for you because my thinking is indebted to the scholarship and public praxis of Sara Ahmed, and so I wanted to introduce her to you because she was kind enough, through conversation, I did talk to her about this, to let me borrow her term, the Feminist Killjoy. Julia Kristeva has written about how women's bodies have been culturally constructed to launder the negative affects of others. I think about this while actually doing the laundry. Anyway, Ahmed. In August of 2013, Sara Ahmed launched her blog, Feminist Killjoys, as a public companion piece to the more private process of writing her new book, out now, Living a Feminist Life. She briefly describes the dual project as taking off from experiences of being a feminist killjoy at the family table, as well as an angry woman of color at feminist tables or an angry queer of color at queer tables. We learn so much from what we come up against, she writes. The chafing against things such as others' notions of happiness is then useful. It can teach us something about ourselves, what Ahmed refers to as our relatings in this world. Let's start keeping track of the chafing, seriously. One place to start is with the term feminist killjoy. When I told my mother that I was thinking of writing a handbook about how to be one, she expressed concern. Why did I want to make things harder for myself? Aren't there enough epithets about willful subjects circulating without me deliberately taking one up for myself? She didn't actually put it that way. Yes and no, though. That's the answer. The term killjoy tends to be derisive. Someone who is a wet blanket who rains on the parade. The person who says quiet down to people engaged in riotous laughter. But when appended to the term feminist, killjoy acquires nuance. Feminist is too often understood as inherently and problematically militant. When brought together, feminist and killjoy trouble the habitual understandings of one another. Double positives? Not quite. But taken together, they usefully disrupt expectations and so-called common sense. The feminist killjoy takes pleasure in the work of interrupting the patriarchal norms that pass as joys. Burn it down. She gleefully lights the match. According to Ahmed, a feminist killjoy is someone whose existence makes sense when we situate her within the context of an intersectional feminist critique of happiness. What do we mean by happiness, really? Much has been written about the pursuit of happiness in both scholarly and popular realms, and the only common denominator is that these days, happiness is as much a socialized and commodified product as it is a subjective and individual experience of lightness. Happiness is elusive, and it is a social imperative. Capitalism suggests we can buy happiness. Liberalism posits happiness as an integral part of citizenship, at least in North America. And neoliberalism implies that happiness is hypermobile and hyper-accessible if only we buy into it. With what money and what jobs, I ask. But what if we are neither happy in the conventional sense, nor are we quite certain that we agree with social and subjective imperatives that conventional happiness implies? What if happiness chafes us? For Ahmed, that discomfort tells us something important. Being happy puts us in line with dominant belief systems such as patriarchy, capitalism, neoliberalism, racism. Being happy for Ahmed means we line up with what's expected of us. But so much of contemporary life rubs against this so-called happiness. If you're a woman, a queer person, a trans person, a person of color, a poor person, a differently abled person, in other words, if you're a person who does not fit neatly into the narrow definitions of white, straight, economically stable masculinity, it's more likely that your experiences do not readily line up with what you're told should make you happy. That feeling of not quite lining up, of not quite fitting, can be isolating, alienating, disempowering. Our attempts to line up with the dominant conception of happiness can keep those systems that are fueled by the happiness imperative in fine working order. This self-harming pursuit of the impossible happiness is another form of what Lauren Berlant calls cruel optimism. Happiness as restricted access, happiness as a country club, a resort, an old boys club for certain boys only, happiness as body shame, as racism, as transphobia, as misogyny. These are some of the joys that need killing. Enter the feminist killjoy. She's a positive figure, the killjoy, though it might take some unlearning to see her as such. The feminist killjoy is not okay with the status quo. She is not settled in the social narratives that are prescribed for her. She will not be conscripted or coerced into restrictive categories of gender or gender performance. She will not tolerate casual instances of racism or classism. She won't keep quiet to maintain a smooth dinner conversation. No. The feminist killjoy is one who understands that to be a world maker and to make space for herself in the world and others, she must disrupt the complacency that the happiness imperative demands. In response to critiques that she's calling out happiness imperatives and rattling the bars of the status quo, the feminist killjoy affirms, yes, and then she rattles some more. Thank you.